I watched my sister's face crumble as she stared at her reflection, the two short bangs framing her features like a cruel joke. 5 minutes ago, she'd walked into the salon with that smug, superior smile she always wore when copying me. Now those bangs, the ones she'd demanded to match mine exactly, sat cropped and uneven across her forehead while I stood beside her, my own bangs grown out into elegant, face-framing layers that had taken 6 months of careful styling to achieve. "What did you do?" Melissa shrieked at the hairdresser, her voice shrill enough to make everyone in the salon turn and stare. "I said I wanted them like hers." She jabbed a manicured finger in my direction, but I just smiled serenely, tucking one of my perfectly grown-out bangs behind my ear. The hairdresser, a kind woman named Rosa, whom I'd befriended over multiple visits, looked genuinely confused. "But miss, you showed me a picture of short, blunt bangs. You were very specific." "I never—" Melissa's eyes snapped to me, and I watched the realization dawn. The photo she'd saved on her phone, the one she'd thought was a recent picture of me, was actually from 8 months ago, from my previous life, before I died and came back to this moment with all my memories intact. "Oh, Mel," I said softly, injecting just the right amount of concern into my voice. "Didn't you know? I've been growing mine out for months now, but don't worry, they'll grow back, eventually." The look of pure rage on her face was almost worth the 23 years of torment I'd endured before my death. Almost. Let me take you back to where this really began. Not to this moment in the salon, satisfying as it was, but to my first life, the one that ended with me drowning in a bathtub while my family ate dinner downstairs. My name is Elena Thorne, and I was the invisible daughter of the Thorne family for 23 years before I died. Invisible despite being the eldest, invisible despite being the one who raised my younger sister Melissa when our mother was too drunk or too busy with her latest boyfriend. Invisible despite being the one who kept our house running, who made sure bills were paid, who sacrificed my college fund so Melissa could go to her dream school. Melissa. Even her name tastes bitter in my mouth now. She was 3 years younger than me, born with our mother's delicate features and our father's, not mine. Because I learned too late that I wasn't Richard Thorne's biological daughter, charismatic charm. Where I was plain, she was beautiful. Where I was quiet, she was effervescent. Where I worked hard for everything I achieved, success seemed to fall into her lap like rain. Except it didn't, did it? I know that now. In my first life, I thought Melissa was just naturally gifted, naturally lucky, naturally everything I could never be. But after I died, after I felt the water fill my lungs while I lay paralyzed from the crushed sleeping pills my mother had stirred into my evening tea, I saw the truth. In those final moments, as my vision dimmed and my life flashed before my eyes, I saw all the little moments I'd been too blind to notice. Melissa stealing my homework and presenting it as her own. My mother intercepting calls from potential employers and telling them I'd accepted other positions. My stepfather, Richard, deleting scholarship notifications from my email. And I saw what came after my death. Somehow, in those last seconds, I saw Melissa's face when the police ruled my death an accident. I saw her move into my room the very next day. I saw her find the journal I'd kept hidden, full of story ideas and character sketches for the novel I'd been writing in secret. I saw her publish that novel under her own name 3 years later, saw it become a bestseller, saw her accept awards and give interviews about her creative process. I saw her live the life that should have been mine. Then I woke up on my 18th birthday, 5 years before my death, with all those memories burning in my mind like brands. The first thing I did was vomit. The second thing I did was cry. The third thing I did was start planning. Because here's what they didn't know, what they couldn't have known. I remembered everything, every betrayal, every theft, every casual cruelty. I knew which of my ideas Melissa would try to steal. I knew when my mother would sabotage my job interviews. I knew that Richard would try to take credit for my achievements. I knew that in 2 years, Melissa would accidentally destroy my portfolio the night before my big art school interview, the one that could have changed my life. I knew, and I was going to make sure none of it happened the same way again. But I also knew I had to be smart. If I confronted them directly, they'd gaslight me like they always had. If I tried to fight them openly, they'd close ranks and crush me. The Thorne family had perfected the art of making me look crazy, making me seem like the problem, making everyone believe that I was the ungrateful, dramatic, attention-seeking daughter who couldn't accept that her younger sister was simply more talented. So I played the long game. I started small. I hid my real achievements and cultivated fake ones for them to sabotage. I fed Melissa outdated information about trends and styles, watching her embarrass herself while I quietly stayed ahead of the curve. I made subtle changes to my appearance that I knew she'd copy, but only after I'd already moved on to the next thing. The bangs were just the latest in a series of small victories, but they were important. Melissa had built her entire social media presence, and she was obsessed with social media in this timeline too. I'd made sure of that on being the prettier sister. She'd spent our entire childhood getting the better clothes, the better opportunities, the better everything because she was biological and I was just the bastard daughter our mother had from a previous relationship. In my first life, I'd cut bangs on impulse 6 months before my death. Melissa had copied them immediately, and somehow they'd looked better on her. Everyone said so. It was just one more thing she'd taken from me and made her own. This time, I'd cut them strategically. I'd spent months growing them out, carefully styling them, taking pictures at each stage and dating them with metadata that would be impossible to fake. I'd built an entire online presence around my hair journey, gaining a modest following of people who loved my styling tips. Then I'd planted the old photo where Melissa would find it in my hidden folder that I knew she regularly snooped through, and waited. She'd walked into that salon so confident. She'd been planning to copy me again, to take my style and make it hers, to once again be the prettier sister with the better hair. Instead, she'd walked out with a haircut that was 8 months out of date, a style I'd already abandoned, and a face full of humiliation. But that was just the beginning. The turning point, the real turning point, came 3 months after the bang incident on the night of my 21st birthday. In my first life, this was the night everything fell apart. Richard, my stepfather, had thrown a party that was ostensibly for me but really for Melissa. She'd announced her engagement to Brett Ashford, my boyfriend of 2 years, the man I'd thought I would marry. I'd spent the whole night smiling while my heart broke, then gone upstairs and cried myself to sleep while they celebrated below. This time, I knew it was coming. I knew Melissa had been sleeping with Brett for months. I knew she'd been whispering poison in his ear, making him see me as clingy, boring, a placeholder until someone better came along. I knew she'd picked my birthday specifically for maximum humiliation. So, I made some changes. First, I broke up with Brett 2 months earlier. I did it publicly at a restaurant, and I made sure to mention that I'd discovered he'd been cheating. I didn't say with whom, not yet, but I planted the seed. Brett, predictable as ever, had been furious. He'd tried to convince me I was wrong, that I was paranoid, that I was sabotaging our relationship. I'd simply smiled and walked away. Second, I'd started dating someone new. Someone Melissa couldn't touch, couldn't manipulate, couldn't steal. His name was Marcus Chen, and in my first life, he'd been a nobody, a scholarship student at the community college where I'd taken classes after being denied admission to every university I'd applied to. Thanks to letters of concern Richard had sent to admissions offices, I learned later. But I remembered something about Marcus that no one else knew yet. His family owned one of the largest tech companies in Asia. He'd been in America incognito, trying to make it on his own merit, trying to escape the pressure of his family name. We'd bonded over being overlooked, over being underestimated, over being trapped by family expectations. In my first life, we'd been friends, good friends. He'd been one of the only people who truly saw me. He'd even cried at my funeral, I'd learned in those strange final visions. He'd been the one to question whether my death was really an accident. This time, I'd made sure we became more than friends. Not because I wanted to use him, though I won't pretend his family connections weren't useful, but because I genuinely cared about him. Because in those memories of my first life, I'd realized that he'd cared about me too. That maybe if I'd been brave enough to see it, we could have been something real. We were something real now. Third, I'd been preparing for this party for months. I'd let slip to my mother that I was planning to make a big announcement, something about my future. She'd immediately started planning how to sabotage it, how to make sure Melissa's engagement overshadowed whatever I had to say. Perfect. The party started at 7. By 7:30, Melissa had already cornered me twice to gloat about her dress, her hair, her perfect life. She didn't mention Brett, she was waiting for the big moment, but her smugness was palpable. At 8, Marcus arrived. He dressed down like I'd asked, wanting to keep his family identity quiet for now. But even in jeans and a button-down, he was striking. Tall, broad-shouldered, with the kind of quiet confidence that came from actual achievement rather than borrowed glory. Melissa's eyes had locked onto him immediately. I watched her calculate, watched her wonder who he was, watched her decide that whoever he was, she wanted him. I'd smiled and introduced them, watching her turn on her charm, watching Brett's face tighten with jealousy in the corner. Everything was going according to plan. At 9, Melissa made her move. She'd dragged Brett to the center of the living room, tapped a knife against a champagne glass, and announced her engagement with tears in her eyes and a ring on her finger. Everyone had gasped. Everyone had applauded. My mother had cried theatrical tears. Richard had made a speech about his little princess finding her prince. I'd smiled and clapped along with everyone else. Then, when the congratulations died down, I'd cleared my throat. Actually, I'd said, my voice carrying across the room, I have an announcement too. My mother's face had gone rigid. This wasn't part of her script. Marcus and I are also engaged, I'd said, holding up my left hand to show the ring he'd given me 2 weeks ago. It wasn't as large as Melissa's. Marcus had better taste than that, but it was exquisite. A sapphire surrounded by small diamonds, vintage and elegant. The room had gone silent. And, I'd continued, looking directly at Melissa, we're pregnant. The lie had been Marcus's idea. If you really want to destroy her, he'd said, you have to take the one thing she thinks she has over you, the ability to be perfect. He was right. Melissa's face had gone white, then red, then purple. My mother had looked like she was going to faint. Richard had sputtered something about being too young, about being irresponsible. Oh, don't worry, I'd said sweetly. Marcus's family is very supportive. In fact, they're throwing us an engagement party next month at their estate in Singapore. That's when I dropped the real bomb. I'd pulled up Marcus's family website on my phone and projected it onto the TV screen. Thank God for smart TVs, showing the Chen family empire in all its glory, billions in assets, international influence. And there, in the family photo, was Marcus, identified as the eldest son and heir. You're marrying, Melissa's voice had cracked. You can't, I can, I'd said. I am. And unlike some people, I didn't have to steal my sister's boyfriend to do it. The room had erupted. Brett had gone pale. Melissa had started screaming. My mother had tried to play mediator, her mind clearly racing through the implications of what I'd just revealed. If I was marrying into the Chen family, I was suddenly valuable, suddenly worth something, suddenly the golden child. I'd let the chaos swirl around me for a few minutes before Marcus had taken my hand and we'd left. We'd driven to his apartment in comfortable silence, and then I'd told him the truth. I wasn't actually pregnant. I'd lied to match Melissa's drama with my own, to steal her moment the way she'd stolen so many of mine. He'd laughed until he cried. You're incredible, Buzz, he'd said. Absolutely incredible. Then he'd kissed me, and I'd kissed him back, and for the first time in 2 lives, I'd felt like I was exactly where I was supposed to be. But I couldn't let it end there. The party had been satisfying, but it wasn't enough. Not nearly enough. Because here's what I knew. In my first life, Melissa's engagement to Brett had lasted 6 months before she'd cheated on him with someone richer. Brett had been devastated. He'd spiraled into depression, lost his job, and ended up moving back in with his parents. Melissa had moved on without a second thought. This time, I decided to accelerate the timeline. If Melissa was going to destroy Brett anyway, I might as well make sure it served my purposes. I started leaving breadcrumbs. A comment here about seeing Melissa with another man. A carefully edited photo there showing her at a restaurant with someone who definitely wasn't Brett. I made sure these hints reached Brett through mutual friends, through social media, through overheard conversations. Within 3 weeks, Brett was actively spying on Melissa, Within 4, he'd caught her. She'd moved on to targeting a local businessman, someone she thought could elevate her status, now that I'd suddenly become competition by landing Marcus. The breakup was spectacular. Brett showed up at a family dinner, one I'd conveniently been too busy to attend, and confronted Melissa in front of everyone. There was screaming, crying, accusations. Melissa tried to spin it as Brett being controlling and paranoid, but I'd made sure Brett had evidence. Photos, texts, everything he needed to prove Melissa's infidelity. By the end of the night, Melissa's reputation was in tatters, and my mother was scrambling to do damage control. I'd sent Melissa a single text message that night. "How does it feel?" She'd known exactly what I meant. The real revenge, though, the revenge that mattered most, was still to come. Because while the social humiliation was satisfying, it didn't address the core of what my family had done to me. It didn't address the stolen opportunities, the sabotaged dreams, the systematic destruction of my self-worth. It didn't address the fact that they'd killed me. Yes, my mother had put the pills in my tea in my first life. I knew that now. I remembered the bitter taste I'd attributed to a bad batch of chamomile. I remembered feeling dizzy, going upstairs to take a bath, thinking I just needed to relax. I remembered sinking into the water and being unable to move, unable to call for help. My mother had wanted me gone. She'd been planning it for weeks, I realized, as I reviewed my memories with the clarity that came from reliving them. I'd accidentally discovered that Richard wasn't my biological father. I'd found my original birth certificate while cleaning the attic. I'd confronted her about it, threatened to tell Richard the truth about the affair that had produced me. She'd decided I was too dangerous to keep around. In my first life, she'd gotten away with it. The autopsy had shown sleeping pills in my system, but I'd had a prescription for anxiety. The death had been ruled accidental, a tragic case of a young woman who'd taken too many pills and fallen asleep in the bath. This time, I was going to make sure she paid for it, but I had to be smart. I had to be patient. So, I started building my case. I documented everything. Every time my mother tried to sabotage me, I had proof. Every time she made a mistake that cost me an opportunity, I had records. Every time she favored Melissa over me, I had witnesses. I also started investigating her past. I hired a private investigator, paid for with money I'd been secretly saving by selling my art online, something I'd hidden from my family this time around, to dig into my mother's history. What he found was illuminating. My mother, Victoria Thorne, had a pattern. She'd been married twice before Richard. Both husbands had died in accidents. Both had had substantial life insurance policies that Victoria had inherited. The investigator couldn't prove she'd killed them, but the pattern was there. Richard wasn't my father, but he also wasn't safe. I could see it now, the way Victoria looked at him when she thought no one was watching. The way she'd started taking out life insurance policies on him. The way she'd been slowly isolating him from his friends and family. She was planning to kill him too. In my first life, I died before I could see what happened to Richard, but I'd bet anything that he hadn't lived long after me. Victoria was a black widow, consuming her mates and moving on to the next one. I couldn't let that happen. Not because I cared about Richard. He'd been complicit in my abuse, had helped Victoria tear me down to build Melissa up, but because I needed him alive for what came next. 6 months after my 21st birthday party, I made my next move. I invited Richard to lunch, just the two of us. It was unusual. We never spent time alone together, but I told him I wanted to talk about family finances now that I was getting married. He'd agreed, probably thinking it was a chance to lecture me about being responsible with Marcus's money. Instead, I'd laid out everything I knew. The affairs, the mysterious deaths of Victoria's previous husbands, the life insurance policies, the pattern of abuse that had characterized my childhood. The way Victoria had turned him against me, isolated me, made me the scapegoat for everything wrong in the family. And then I'd shown him the birth certificate. The real one, with my biological father's name on it. A man named James Harrison who'd died in a car accident 2 weeks after I was born. Richard had gone pale. "This is insane," he'd said. "Victoria wouldn't..." "Wouldn't she?" I'd asked. "Think about it, Richard. Really think about it. How many times has she convinced you that I was the problem? How many times has she made you doubt your own perception of events? How many times has she isolated you from your family, your friends, anyone who might question her narrative?" I'd watched him process it, watched the pieces click into place. Richard wasn't stupid. He was weak, easily manipulated, but not stupid. Once he started looking at the pattern, he couldn't unsee it. "She's planning to kill you," I'd said bluntly. "I don't know when, but she's setting it up. The life insurance, the isolation, the way she's been slowly increasing your medication doses." "I checked your pill bottles, Richard. She's been giving you more than your doctor prescribed." His hands had trembled as he'd pulled out his phone and checked his prescription records. His face had gone from pale to gray. "Why are you telling me this?" he'd asked finally. "After everything, why warn me?" "Because I need you to testify against her," I'd said. "I need you to help me prove what she did, what she tried to do. And because despite everything, I don't want another person to die because of her." It was partially true. I did need his testimony. But more than that, I needed him to feel grateful to me, indebted to me. I needed him on my side for what came next. Richard had agreed. He'd moved out of the house that week, claiming he needed space to think about the marriage. Victoria had been furious but helpless. She couldn't stop him without revealing her hand. With Richard on my side, I moved to phase 2, taking down Melissa. Melissa's downfall was almost too easy. She'd built her entire life on stolen accomplishments, stolen relationships, stolen opportunities. All I had to do was expose the foundation of lies and everything else would collapse. I started with her college degree. Melissa had graduated magna cum laude from a prestigious university, a fact she never let anyone forget. What people didn't know was that I'd written most of her papers in my first life. I'd been the one doing her homework, completing her assignments, even taking some of her online exams for her. This time, I hadn't helped her at all. But Melissa had found other ways to cheat. She'd been buying papers online, paying other students to complete her work, even sleeping with a TA to get better grades. I'd been documenting it all, screenshots of payment transactions, emails arranging her cheating, even a recording, perfectly legal in our state with single-party consent, of her bragging to a friend about how easy it was to fool everyone. I'd sent everything to the university's ethics board. Within a week, Melissa was under investigation. Within 2 weeks, her degree had been revoked pending a full review. Within a month, she'd been expelled. Her job offer, the prestigious position at a marketing firm that she'd been bragging about, had evaporated. Without a degree, she was unemployable in her field. And because she'd been living beyond her means, funded by credit cards and loans she'd taken out assuming she'd have a high-paying job, she was suddenly drowning in debt. But I wasn't done, because the degree was just the beginning. Melissa had been building a social media presence, positioning herself as an influencer and lifestyle expert. She had hundreds of thousands of followers who believed in her carefully curated image of success and perfection. I destroyed that too. Remember that novel I mentioned? The one Melissa had stolen from my journal and published in my first life? I'd been writing it again, but this time I'd been smarter. I'd been copywriting each chapter as I wrote it, creating a paper trail that proved I was the original author. I'd also been leaving strategic drafts where Melissa could find them. She'd stolen them again, unable to resist the temptation. But this time, I was ready. When Melissa announced that she was publishing a novel, her lifelong dream, she called it, I'd let her go through with it, let her do interviews about her creative process, her inspiration, her dedication to her craft, let her build hype and anticipation. Then, one day before the publication date, I'd released my own version, the real version, with dated copyright registrations proving I'd written it first. I'd posted side-by-side comparisons showing how Melissa's version was identical to mine, down to specific word choices and punctuation. The internet had erupted. Melissa had gone from rising star to literary pariah overnight. Her publisher had pulled the book. Her social media followers had turned on her viciously. She'd been exposed as a fraud, a plagiarist, a liar. The lawsuits had followed. My publisher, yes, I'd found a legitimate publisher who'd loved my work, had sued Melissa and her publisher for copyright infringement. I'd personally sued her for theft of intellectual property. The damages had been substantial. Melissa had lost everything. Her degree, her career, her reputation, her book deal, and soon, her money. She'd been forced to move back in with Victoria, who'd been dealing with her own problems thanks to Richard's testimony and my evidence. Victoria's downfall had been more complex but ultimately more satisfying. With Richard's cooperation, I'd been able to access financial records that showed a pattern of fraud going back years. Victoria had been siphoning money from Richard's accounts, forging his signature on documents, even stealing from me. Money I'd saved for college had mysteriously disappeared. supposedly spent on family emergencies that never existed. I'd reported everything to the police: financial fraud, forgery, theft. And because Richard was willing to testify, they'd taken it seriously. But the real victory came when I revealed what Victoria had done to me in my first life. I couldn't prove the murder directly, it hadn't happened in this timeline. But I could prove the attempt, because Victoria, true to form, had tried again. 3 months after I'd exposed Melissa's plagiarism, I'd received a package at my new apartment, the one I shared with Marcus, the one my family didn't know the address to, except that I'd stupidly told Victoria during a moment of weakness. The package had contained tea, expensive, organic chamomile tea, Victoria's apology for not being a better mother. The note had been full of regret and love and pleas for reconciliation. I'd known immediately what it was. The same method she'd used in my first life, the same brand of tea, probably the same pills ground up and mixed in. I'd called the police, I'd had the tea tested, and sure enough, it was laced with enough sedatives to kill someone my size if brewed and consumed as directed. Victoria had tried to play it off as a mistake, as someone else tampering with the package, but the evidence was overwhelming. Her fingerprints on the box. The purchase of both the tea and the prescription sleeping pills under a fake name, traced back to her through security camera footage. The pattern of behavior established by her previous marriages and the testimony of her previous in-laws, whom my investigator had tracked down. Victoria was arrested and charged with attempted murder. The investigation into her previous husband's deaths was reopened. Richard filed for divorce and a restraining order. Melissa, still living with Victoria, was left to deal with the fallout alone. The trial was long and brutal. Victoria's lawyer tried to paint me as vindictive, as a daughter with mental health issues who was seeking attention. They tried to use my history of anxiety caused by their abuse, but they conveniently left that out against me. But I had Marcus, I had Richard, I had documentation of years of abuse, I had proof of the poison tea, I had the pattern of dead husbands and life insurance payouts, I had my private investigator's findings, I had everything. Victoria was convicted, attempted murder, multiple counts of fraud, forgery, and theft. She was sentenced to 25 years in prison with no possibility of parole for at least 15. Melissa hadn't been charged with anything. She'd been a victim of Victoria's manipulation as much as anyone in some ways. But her association with Victoria, combined with her own scandals, had made her radioactive. She couldn't get a job, couldn't rebuild her social media presence, couldn't escape the shadow of what her mother had done and what she herself had been exposed doing. Last I heard, she was working at a retail store, barely making ends meet, living in a studio apartment in the worst part of town. She'd tried to reach out to me once, begging for help, for money, for a chance to apologize. I'd blocked her number. 2 years after Victoria's conviction, Marcus and I got married. It was a small ceremony, just close friends and his family. Richard was there, sober, in therapy, trying to make amends for the years of abuse he'd enabled. I'd forgiven him, mostly. He'd been weak, but he'd found his spine in the end. My biological father's sister, my aunt, who'd been searching for me for years after my mother cut off contact, walked me down the aisle. She cried through the whole ceremony, overwhelmed at finally meeting the niece she'd thought she'd lost. I wore a dress I'd designed myself. I'd discovered in this second life that I had a talent for fashion design. Without my family sabotaging me, without constantly giving away my and energy to Melissa's needs, I'd been able to pursue my passions. I'd launched my own small clothing line. It wasn't hugely successful yet, but it was mine. Built on my own merit, my own creativity, my own hard work. The novel I'd published had done well too. Not bestseller level, but respectable. Enough to establish me as a legitimate author, to prove that I had talent beyond what Melissa had tried to claim for herself. Marcus had never asked me to stop working or to give up my dreams. His family had welcomed me with open arms, seeing in me something his previous girlfriends, all chosen by his parents, all focused on his money, had lacked. They saw someone who loved their son for who he was, not what he could provide. The wedding was perfect. The marriage was better. 6 months after the wedding, I found out I was actually pregnant. For real this time, not just a strategic lie. Marcus had been terrified and ecstatic in equal measure. I'd been shocked but deeply, profoundly happy. Our daughter was born 9 months later. We named her Elena, after me, but gave her the middle name Grace, because that's what this second life had been, Grace. An undeserved second chance to make things right, to reclaim what had been stolen. to become who I was always meant to be. 5 years after Victoria's conviction, I visited her in prison. It was the first time I'd seen her since the trial. She'd aged badly. Prison didn't suit her. The perfectly coiffed hair was now gray and unkempt. The designer clothes were replaced with an orange jumpsuit. The manicured nails were broken and dirty. She looked at me with hate and confusion in equal measure. "Why are you here?" "To show you what you failed to destroy," I said. I told her about my life, about my successful marriage, my beautiful daughter, my thriving career, about the fact that I'd bought the house she and Richard had owned, the one she'd lost in the divorce, and turned it into a creative studio where I worked on my designs and my writing. I told her about Richard, who'd remarried a kind woman and was finally happy, about how he'd set up a trust fund for my daughter and had asked to be called Grandpa, despite having no biological connection to her. I told her about Melissa, who'd finally gotten sober and was working through her own trauma in therapy. We weren't close, we'd never be close, but she'd sent me a genuine apology letter last year. I'd written back, we were cordial now, that was enough. "You tried to erase me," I said to Victoria, "and you spent 23 years trying to make me disappear, and when that didn't work, you tried to kill me. But here I am, thriving, happy, successful, everything you tried to prevent me from being." Victoria's face had gone red. "You're just like your father," she spat. "Worthless, a mistake. I should have what?" I interrupted. "Should have succeeded in killing me?" "You failed, Victoria. You failed because you underestimated me. You thought I was weak, that I was stupid, that I would just accept the abuse and the neglect and the constant sabotage. But I wasn't weak. I was just waiting for my moment." I stood up to leave. "I won't visit again. This was just to give you closure. To let you know that despite everything you did, despite every way you tried to destroy me, I won. I'm happy. You're not. And that's exactly the ending you deserve." As I walked out of that prison, I felt lighter than I had in years, both lives really, because this was the moment I'd been waiting for since I'd woken up on my 18th birthday with memories of a future that would never happen now. This was the moment I finally let go of Elena Thorne, the victim, and fully embraced Elena Chen, the survivor. 10 years after my rebirth, I'm sitting in my studio working on designs for my next collection. My daughter, Elena, Ellie we call her, is 8 now, bright and confident, and so full of life it sometimes takes my breath away. She's never known abuse. She's never known neglect. She's never known what it's like to be the scapegoat, the forgotten one, the daughter who doesn't matter. She'll never know those things. I'll make sure of it. Marcus comes in with lunch, kissing my forehead as he sets down a tray of sandwiches and fruit. "How's it going?" he asks. "Good," I say, showing him the sketches I've been working on. "I think this might be my best collection yet." He studies them with genuine interest. Marcus has never dismissed my work, never suggested I should give it up to focus on being a wife or mother. He's been my biggest supporter, my partner in every sense of the word. "They're beautiful," he says. "You're incredibly talented. You know that, right?" I do know. It took me 2 lifetimes to believe it, to internalize it, to stop letting Victoria's and Melissa's voices tell me I was worthless. But I know now. My phone buzzes. It's a text from Richard. "Ellie wants to know if you've decided on the summer camp yet. She's very excited." I smile and text back. "Tell her yes. Fashion design camp just like she wanted." Richard responds with a thumbs up and a photo of Ellie grinning at the camera. She has Marcus's eyes and my smile, and she's going to have every opportunity I never had in my first life. Another text comes through, this one from an unknown number. I almost delete it without reading, but something makes me open it. "I heard your new book is being adapted into a movie. Congratulations, you deserve it. M. Melissa." She texts me occasionally now, always from different numbers because I keep blocking her. Not out of anger anymore, but out of necessity. We're civil when we run into each other. It's inevitable in a city this size. But we're not friends. We'll never be friends. I don't respond to the text. I don't need to. Melissa knows where I stand, knows that while I've forgiven her for my own peace of mind, that doesn't mean I've forgotten. Some wounds are too deep to heal completely. Some betrayals are too fundamental to ever fully overcome. But I'm okay with that. Because the thing about being reborn, about getting a second chance at life, is that you learn what really matters. And what really matters isn't revenge, though I won't pretend that wasn't satisfying. It's building a life worth living. It's surrounding yourself with people who love you for who you are, not what you can give them. It's pursuing your passions without fear of sabotage or theft. It's raising a daughter who will never know what it's like to be made to feel less than. It's being happy in spite of everything that was done to try to prevent it. Victoria is still in prison. She'll be there for another 10 years at least, possibly longer. I don't think about her much anymore. She's a closed chapter, a villain defeated, a problem solved. Melissa is Melissa. Still struggling, still trying to figure out who she is without the stolen accomplishments and borrowed identities. Hope she finds herself someday. I genuinely do, but that's her journey, not mine. Richard is happy with his new wife and stepchildren. He's become a better person, a better father figure, someone who learned from his mistakes. We have dinner together once a month, and he's wonderful with Ellie. It's not the relationship we could have had if he'd been stronger when it mattered, but it's something. It's enough. And me? I'm finally living the life I was always meant to live. I'm a successful designer, a published author, a loving wife, a devoted mother. I'm surrounded by people who support me, who celebrate my achievements, who would never dream of tearing me down to build themselves up. I'm happy. That's the revenge Victoria and Melissa never saw coming. Not the exposed lies or the legal consequences or the public humiliation. Those were satisfying, but they were just means to an end. The real revenge was becoming happy in spite of them. Was building a life so full of joy and success and love that their attempts to destroy me became nothing more than a bad memory. Was proving that their abuse and sabotage and betrayal couldn't define me, couldn't limit me, couldn't stop me from becoming exactly who I was always meant to be. I look at the designs spread across my desk, at the book contracts waiting to be signed, at the photos of my family on the walls. I think about the little girl I used to be, the one who thought she was worthless because that's what her family told her. The young woman I became in my first life who died believing she had failed at everything that mattered. And I smile. Because that girl, that young woman would be so proud of who I became, would be amazed at what I accomplished, would be thrilled to know that despite everything, despite the abuse and the death and the second chance that shouldn't have been possible, I made it. I survived. I thrived. I won. And that, ultimately, is the best revenge of all. 15 years after my rebirth, I'm giving a keynote speech at a design conference. It's a huge honor, one that 18-year-old me with fresh memories of death and abuse never could have imagined. But 33-year-old me, standing on this stage in front of hundreds of people, feels like this is exactly where I'm supposed to be. The speech is about resilience, about overcoming obstacles, about refusing to let others define your worth or limit your potential. I don't mention Victoria or Melissa by name. I don't need to, but everyone who knows my story knows what I'm talking about. The hardest thing about surviving abuse, like I needed to say, is learning to trust yourself again. To believe that you're worthy of good things. To stop waiting for the other shoe to drop. For the people you love to betray you. For your achievements to be stolen or diminished or mocked. I scan the crowd and see nodding heads, tear-filled eyes, people who understand because they've been there too. But here's what I learned. You can't let the people who hurt you have power over your future. You can't let their voices become your inner dialogue. You have to fight for yourself, believe in yourself, and build a life that proves them wrong about every single thing they said about you. More nodding. A few people pull out tissues. I'm not going to lie and say it's easy. It's not. There were days when I wanted to give up, when the weight of everything felt like too much. But I kept going, I kept fighting, I kept believing that I deserved better, even when that felt like a lie I was telling myself. I paused, letting the words sink in. And eventually, it stopped feeling like a lie. Eventually, I built a life that reflected my worth, not their abuse. A life full of people who loved me, opportunities I'd earned, achievements that were genuinely mine. I clicked to the next slide, showing photos of my daughter, my husband, my studio, my published books, my design collections. This is what victory looks like. not the destruction of the people who hurt you, though accountability is important and they did face consequences for their actions. But real victory is building a life so full of joy that their attempts to destroy you become nothing more than a footnote in your story. The applause is thunderous. People stand, some crying, some smiling, all of them understanding what it means to survive, to overcome, to win. After the speech, dozens of people come up to thank me, to share their own stories, to ask for advice. A young woman, probably 22 or 23, waits until the crowd thins before approaching. "Ms. Chen," she says hesitantly, "I just wanted to say, your story gave me hope. I'm in a situation similar to what you described, and I've been feeling like there's no way out. But hearing you speak, seeing what you've accomplished, it made me believe that maybe I can get out too." My heart breaks for her. I see myself at that age, trapped and hopeless and unable to imagine a better future. "You can," I tell her firmly, as it won't be easy and it won't happen overnight, but you can. Start planning, start documenting, start building a support system outside your family, and most importantly, start believing that you deserve better. Because you do. She's crying now, but she's smiling too. "Thank you," she whispers. I give her my card, the one with my personal email on it. "If you need help, reach out. I mean it." She clutches the card like a lifeline, and I hope she uses it. I hope she finds her way out. I hope she builds her own version of victory. 20 years after my rebirth, Victoria dies in prison. She's 68, killed by a sudden heart attack. Richard calls to tell me, his voice careful, unsure how I'll react. "I'm not going to the funeral," I say. "But thank you for telling me." "I understand," he says. "I won't be going either. I've moved on." Melissa does go. I see photos on social media. She's public again, trying to rebuild some semblance of a normal life. She looks older, worn down by years of struggling. But there's something in her eyes that wasn't there before. Something like self-awareness, like regret. She posts a long caption about her mother, about their complicated relationship, about the cycle of abuse and how she's working to break it in therapy. It's raw and honest in a way Melissa never was in our first life. I don't comment. I don't like the post. But I do read it, and I feel something like pity. Melissa was a victim too, in her own way. Victoria had molded her into a weapon to use against me, had raised her to believe that stealing and lying and manipulating were acceptable because that's how you survived. It doesn't excuse what Melissa did. It doesn't make us family again, but it helps me understand why she became who she was. And understanding, I've learned, is its own form of closure. I don't celebrate Victoria's death, but I don't mourn it either. She was a cancer that needed to be removed, and now she's gone. The world is better for it. Ellie is 18 now, the same age I was when I woke up with memories of a life that hadn't happened yet. She's applying to design schools, following in my footsteps, not because she feels pressured, but because she genuinely loves it. She's talented, confident, kind, everything I wasn't allowed to be in my first life. She doesn't know about Victoria, not really. She knows I had a difficult childhood, that my birth mother wasn't a good person, that sometimes families can be harmful and you have to protect yourself. But she doesn't know the details, doesn't know about the murder attempts or the systematic abuse or the way I died and was given a second chance. Maybe someday I'll tell her the whole story, maybe when she's older, when she can understand the complexity of it. Or maybe I'll leave it in the past where it belongs. For now, I'm content to watch her flourish in an environment free from toxicity, to see her become the person she was always meant to be without anyone trying to tear her down or steal her light. That's the real victory. Not just saving myself, but breaking the cycle, making sure the next generation never has to suffer what I suffered. 25 years after my rebirth, I'm 43 years old and watching my second book become a New York Times bestseller. The first one did well, but this one, a semi-autobiographical novel about a woman who dies and is given a second chance to right the wrongs done to her, resonates with people on a different level. The reviews call it cathartic, empowering, a triumph of the human spirit. Some people guess that it's based on my real life. Some call it pure fiction. I don't confirm or deny anything. Let them wonder. Marcus and I are sitting on our back porch watching the sunset when my phone rings. It's a number I don't recognize, but something makes me answer. "Elena?" The voice is older, rougher, but familiar. Melissa, I say. I saw your book, she says. I read it. Silence. I wait. I'm calling to apologize, she continues. Really apologize, not just the performative shit I've done before. I've been in therapy for 10 years now, working through everything Mom did to both of us. And I'm finally realizing how much I hurt you, how much I took from you, her voice breaks, how much I destroyed you or tried to, and I'm so, so sorry. I take a deep breath. I've imagined this conversation 1,000 times over 2 lifetimes. In some versions, I scream at her. In others, I hang up. In still others, I forgive her immediately. What I actually say is, I appreciate the apology, Melissa. I do. And I believe that you're sincere. But that doesn't change what happened. It doesn't undo the damage. And it doesn't mean we can have a relationship. I know, she says quickly. I'm not asking for that. I just wanted you to know that I see it now. I see what I did. I see who I was. And I'm trying to be better. That's good, I say, and I mean it. Everyone deserves a chance to grow and change. She hesitates. Did I inspire the villain in your book? The sister? I consider lying, but what's the point? Partially, but she's also our mother. She's every person who ever used someone else's light to fuel their own. She's a composite. She gets redemption at the end, Melissa says quietly. The sister. She gets a chance to start over and become better. Yes. Do you think I can do that? Really? It's the most vulnerable I've ever heard her sound. For just a moment, I see the little girl she was before Victoria twisted her into something ugly. The little girl who used to follow me around, who called me her favorite person, who cried when I went to school and left her behind. I think anyone can choose to be better, I say carefully. But it's a choice you have to make every day. It's work, hard work, and it means accepting that some bridges can't be rebuilt. Yeah, she says. Yeah, I get that. We talk for a few more minutes about nothing important. Her job, she's a manager at a nonprofit now, working with abuse survivors. My life, the book, the business, my family, it's cordial, pleasant even. When we hang up, Marcus looks at me with raised eyebrows. That was unexpected. Yeah, I agree. It was. How do you feel? I think about it, really think about it. Okay, I decide I feel okay. She's not my sister anymore, not really. But she's a person who's trying to do better. And that's enough. He kisses my temple. You're incredible, you know that? I lean into him, watching the sun sink below the horizon. I'm just a person who got a second chance and decided to make it count. 30 years after my rebirth, I'm 48 years old and retiring from my design company. Not because I have to, but because I want to. I've accomplished everything I set out to do and more. My designs have been worn by celebrities, featured in major fashion magazines, sold in high-end boutiques around the world. I've written 5 novels, all bestsellers. I've given countless speeches. I've mentored dozens of young designers and writers. I've built an empire from nothing, from less than nothing, from the ashes of a life that was deliberately destroyed. Ellie is taking over the design company. She's 28 now, brilliant and creative and business-minded in ways I never was. She's going to take what I built and make it even better. I'm moving into a new phase. I want to focus on writing full-time. I want to travel with Marcus. I want to spend more time with our grandchildren. Yes, plural. Ellie has 2 daughters, and they're perfect. On the day of my retirement party, I'm standing in the gallery space showcasing 30 years of my designs when someone approaches me. It takes me a moment to recognize her because she's aged so much, but when I do, my breath catches. Melissa. She's 51 now, gray-haired and wrinkled in a way that makes her look older than her years. Life has been hard on her, but there's something peaceful in her expression that wasn't there before. I wasn't sure if I should come, she says, but I wanted to see it. What you built. What you became. I gesture to the space around us. Well, here it is. She walks slowly through the gallery, studying each design, each photo, each timeline marker of my career. When she reaches the section about my novels, she stops for a long time. "Do you ever wonder," she asks without turning around, "what would have happened if Mom hadn't? If we'd been different? If I'd been different?" Sometimes, I admit, but not often. I can't change the past, Melissa. I can only build the future. She turns to face me. "I'm proud of you," she says. "I know I don't have the right to be. I know I don't have the right to feel anything about your life after what I did to try to destroy it. But I am proud. You're amazing, Elena. You always were. I was just too blinded by jealousy and Mom's poison to see it." It's the most honest thing she's ever said to me. And despite everything, despite all the pain and betrayal and abuse, I feel something soften inside me. "Thank you," I say simply. We don't hug, we don't exchange numbers or promise to stay in touch. But when she leaves, I watch her go with something that's not quite forgiveness, but isn't hatred either. Acceptance, maybe. An acknowledgement that she was both villain and victim, that people can change even if they can't undo the damage they've done. Marcus finds me standing there, lost in thought. "You okay?" he asks. "Yeah," I say, turning to face him with a smile. "I really am." And I realize it's true. After 30 years in this second life, after all the revenge and rebuilding and reclaiming, I've finally reached a place of genuine peace. The past doesn't haunt me anymore. Victoria is dead. Melissa is managing her own demons. Richard is trying to be better. And me? I'm free. Finally, completely free. 40 years after my rebirth, I'm 58 years old and sitting in a hospital bed, holding my first great-grandchild. Ellie's eldest daughter just gave birth to a beautiful baby girl, and they've asked me to choose her middle name. I choose Grace. Again, because that's what all of this has been. Grace upon grace upon grace. The grace of a second chance, the grace of surviving when I should have died, the grace of building a life beyond what I ever imagined possible. Marcus is 71 now, silver-haired and slower moving, but still the man I fell in love with twice. We've been married for 37 years in this lifetime, and I love him more now than I did on our wedding day. Richard is 83, living in a retirement community with his wife. We have lunch together every few months. He always asks about Ellie, about the great-grandchildren, about my writing. He never mentions Victoria, neither do I. Melissa died 3 years ago. Cancer? I went to the funeral. I even spoke, sharing a carefully edited version of our childhood, talking about the sister I might have had if circumstances had been different. It was the kindest thing I could do, and I did it not for her, but for the little girl she'd been before Victoria destroyed her. My novels are considered modern classics. My designs are in museum collections. My legacy is secure not because I destroyed my enemies, but because I built something beautiful in spite of them. Looking at this tiny baby in my arms, this newest member of a family that's healthy and loving and free from the toxicity that defined my early life, I feel a profound sense of completion. I survived, I thrived, I won, and I broke the cycle, ensuring that no one in my lineage will ever have to suffer what I suffered. That's the real happy ending. Not the revenge, though that was satisfying, but the generations that come after, growing up safe and loved, and free to become whoever they're meant to be. As I hold this baby, I think about the 18-year-old girl I was when I woke up with memories of a death that hadn't happened yet. I think about how lost she felt, how angry, how desperate for justice. I think about the long strategic path she took to reclaim her life and destroy those who'd tried to destroy her. And I wish I could tell her that it was all worth it. Every moment of planning, every strategic move, every painful confrontation. Because it led here, to this moment, to this baby, to this beautiful, messy, complicated, wonderful life. My sister cut bangs to copy me. But after Rebirth, I'd already grown mine out, and that small, petty, perfectly calculated victory was just the beginning of everything.